Welcome to Business Today Television from the India Today Group studio here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I'm Siddharth Zarabi, and with me a panel of guests. Dr. Ajay Mathur to my immediate left, the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. To his left, Vaishali Nigam Sinha, the Chairperson of Sustainability at Renew Power. And Tejpreet Singh Chopra, Founder and CEO of Bharat Light and Power. There is light here, the sun has come out, and this is a theme where we are going to pick up solar and other green energy alternatives. Dr. Mathur, I'm starting with you. I think it's just a sheer coincidence that your session and the sun both are coming out together. Is there a message, a larger message in this?
The message is very clear.
The mic closer.
The message is very clear. The sun is always there. It may be behind the clouds, but it's there.
It's always there. It's always. And when there are clouds of recession, fears, uncertainty, war, supply side disruptions, but for the sun and solar power, that really doesn't matter.
Well, Siddharth, you'll remember our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, once said, the sun is always shining somewhere around the globe. I think that captures the heart of the issue of that solar energy is being generated somewhere. And the challenge is, how do we capture it? How do we move it?
Okay.
As the years have gone by, we have seen an increasing amount of solar energy generation coming up. We are now seeing the wires to move it. We are seeing green hydrogen through which we could move the electricity which is then converted into hydrogen. In the last 5 years, we have seen a sea change in how we have looked at renewable energy and particularly at solar energy.
Okay. Vaishali, I'm coming to you, and not a corporate question really. In the 80s, I recall there used to be solar power cookers, which was basically a contraption with a glass on the front and a metal body, and it was advertised as being the cheapest way to boil your rice, boil your dal and your potatoes. And I know of several families who were using it. That was the 80s, and so, perhaps that thing was ahead of its time. But since you handle sustainability, forget the B2B perspective. Explain to our viewers, what does solar mean from a B2C perspective?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this show, and so glad that the sun is out in cold Davos. From a B2C perspective, I think we are now going beyond the sun. It's really about sustainable existence. And, this is not being driven by individuals, not by the private sector, not by the investors or regulators or countries or an international platform. Pardon my saying that, Ajay. But it's being driven by all of us together. It's the magic of everybody coming together and agreeing that sustainable is profitable, sustainable is the way to go, and there is no alternative to sustainability. And so things like solar and wind and hybrid and green hydrogen are all manifestations. And when we're going to be having this conversations 2 years from now, that's going to be conventional renewables or conventional. And we are going to have so much more. I think more than 80% of new technologies are yet to be invented for us to be able to meet our net zero goals by 2030. So it goes beyond consumers. Of course, consumers are the ones who demand, and they make the world go round.
And they are the ones who will ultimately pay for it. Tejpreet, getting the mic to you. Vaishali said sustainable means profitable. Is that true? As a practitioner, what would you say?
First of all, good to have you and good to see you again, Siddharth, in sunny Davos. What you just said is absolutely true. And let me just explain to you why. This morning, I was shocked. We were in a discussion on airports around the world. And I went into the discussion thinking they're going to be talking about, post-COVID, what's happening at the airport. But believe it or not, they were talking about sustainability in aviation, sustainability at airports, sustainability in airlines. And I was quite surprised.
Don't tell me someone said solar panels on the wings of an aircraft.
No, we haven't got there yet.
But don't be surprised if that happens.
But it was fascinating because it was the CEO of one of the largest airports in the United States said by going solar, he's saving $20 million a year right? There was another gentleman in the room who's talking about hydrogen engines for aircraft. And he's showing the world that today it might be more expensive than traditional fuel, but there is a way that the pressure from consumers on airlines, that there will be a push from Boeing and Airbus and the OEMs to move towards green. So that's what I really feel. That's a good example. And what Vaishali just said is that now it's across industries. There is a significant reduction in the cost of energy in renewables, and therefore there's a huge push in moving towards renewable energy because it's huge cost savings for all these companies, and you're doing good.
Maybe a quick follow-up before I come to Dr. Mathur. Just a quick follow-up. What does the entry of very large corporates, industrial houses, the Ambanis, the Adanis mean? Try and explain that, because sometimes in the business press we take it for granted. But when someone with formidable capacity to aggregate capital, manpower and technology comes into a sector, fundamental changes happen, although regulation remains important for such companies also. What is happening in India, and how should one understand this large mega corporate entry into this sector?
Yeah. Siddharth, a country with over 1 billion people, we need scale. That's our biggest challenge. And I think the good news about having these large corporates get into this sector is that they have the financial power to make those big, risky bets. And I do admire the fact, because it is risky. It is an investment somebody's making. Nothing is guaranteed. So I really feel proud and happy that these big corporates are getting in and making these significant bets. But what gets me excited, it's not only the traditional solar and wind. That's been there, done that. They're taking the next step towards hydrogen, new technologies that were not being done before. This morning at Davos in a breakfast session, the CEO of one of the largest oil and gas companies was talking about investing large, vast sums of money in CCS, in carbon capture sequestration. So I would never have thought some years ago even that a big American global oil and gas company putting such vast amounts into sustainable technologies. But that's the way we need to do, because to Vaishali's point, it's a shared responsibility around the world. It's not only my job or your job, it's governments, it's stakeholders, it's the private sector, it's the regulators that have to come together to completely transform and make this sustainable energy transition happen.
Yeah, sure. And then I'll go to Dr.
Just a couple of points on, green aviation fuel. When I was flying into Davos, Zurich Air had an option for me to fund their transition to green aviation fuel. How cool is that?
Yeah, that is.
Right, so that's one. And on the new entrants, etc., I just want to make a point. I think our country has really taken the lead. As far as this energy transition is concerned. And I remember in 2015, I think, when we talked about 175 gigawatts by 2022, we were like, impossible. I mean, how can we even do that? We are not even at 40. How will it happen? Now we are talking about 500 gigawatts. So there is scope for pioneers.
500 by when, just for our viewers?
2030.
2030.
Right?
500 gigawatt by
yeah.
2030. Take note of that, viewers.
And at the cost of not sounding very modest, it's like pioneers like Renew and other players and bigger players and global players and more can come into India, and yet we will have space for more.
Dr. Mathur, I want you to tell our viewers that while the country is targeting what we call net zero by 2070, practically 5 decades from now, when will this transition mean that conventional sources will get surpassed by green alternative energy sources during this 5-decade journey? And a quick point, we are completely, significantly dependent on fossil fuels. Right. During this 5-decade journey, when will that switch happen?
Siddharth, I think there are two key tipping points. The first is when solar plus storage, or renewables plus storage, it produces electricity that is competitive with fossil fuels. Our estimation, the forecast that the Solar Alliance has made, it seems that this will happen in the years 2023, which is now, 2024 or 2025. Solar alone is the cheapest form of electricity in 32 geographies around the world. Solar plus storage will become the cheapest in this year, next year, or the year after that. After that, it doesn't make sense for banks, for companies to invest in fossil fuel based electricity. That's when the change will start happening.
Can I interject here? If that is production, What about storage? One doesn't hear about storage. I could be completely ignorant about it.
So
is storage keeping pace?
What is happening in storage is that between 2010 and 2020, the price of storage fell 90%.
And that applies to India as well?
That applies to India as well.
Because we are import dependent quite a bit.
Right. So India put out a bid for a large solar-based battery system. This is still expensive. It is not yet competitive. But the price that we got was less than the price that we had expected even a few months ago. The short point is that future prices that we are seeing in other parts of the world, for example in the US, are already competing.
Is there a Moore's law for solar power?
We think there is.
What is that?
Generally speaking, when the total capacity becomes 10 times, the price falls to half.
Okay. One quick follow-up, NTB. I'll bring you on that. Dr. Mathur, just quick point. Solar panels and equipment, a 20% import duty, part of Atmanirbhar. But in your experience, is it working? Has it helped or has it become a hindrance?
Well, I think what has been a huge help is the performance production linked incentive program that has been brought in. Because what has helped is in local production of cells, local production of batteries and so on.
With 100% import substitution or partial?
Well, it starts with partial but it moves to 100. So
TB,
you are part of it.
I'll get you. You want to come in first?
No, go ahead, TB.
Go ahead. What do you want me to do?
No, I just wanted the same point of view from you on the 20% duty and its impact. And is it time, if you can, because we are days away from the budget, to sort of relook that?
Siddharth, I think it's a fundamental question on a strategic intent for our country, right? Energy, as this crisis has shown, is a very important thing for every nation in the world. And I think the situation in the war has taught a lot of nations that one has to be pragmatic, one has to be practical. We have over 1 billion people to feed, and therefore we need to make sure that in the long term, we need to ensure that we are as less energy dependent for our energy needs. And therefore, in the longer term, I think it's important that we incentivize or provide the right regulatory framework to start manufacturing in our country so we can be less dependent on importing panels. So I think from a long term...
So the PLI isn't enough? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is the fact that I'm glad we're going in that direction.
But more needs to be done.
But more needs to be done because the scale that we need to achieve to get costs down is going to be significant, which needs a lot of capital. But let me just say this also, to your point on, where's that Moore's law, etc. What gives me a lot of hope is the fact that the whole EV revolution that's happening requires the same technology and chemistries with lithium ion that's going to help get that scale and storage technology, which is going to help further bring down prices a lot. Yet at the same time, it's the ultimate nirvana that everybody's working on. There are tons of companies and startups around the world doing a lot of research on energy storage technologies with a variety of chemistries. But which one will eventually win, I don't know. It's still in that transition phase. But all we do know is that history has shown that not necessarily the best technology wins. It's the technology that's able to scale, it's able to bring down costs, that generally wins.
Yes,
if
go
I
ahead.
can follow up on that. Siddharth, one of the key things that is happening is that the large companies who have entered into renewables in India are now buying up companies where these new chemistries are happening. So, for example, instead of lithium, using sodium, which is available everywhere. Who is owning them? Reliance. We are seeing a new paradigm as far as technology ownership is concerned. We are also seeing a new paradigm as far as getting these companies in. Reliance or Adani will have a huge market, and therefore using these technologies and reaching out to that large market is something which we have never seen before.
Won't there be large execution risks also with large companies?
Of course there are. There are large risks, but
as the startup companies, smaller companies in size would tell you, there are headwinds that keep happening.
So one of the things that we are seeing is that smaller companies which are very innovative are bought by larger companies which have markets.
Only if the promoter wants to sell out.
I just wanted to say that I think, I was in a session where Al Gore shared a very interesting statistic. He said for every dollar spent last year on fossil, there was 1.5 spent on clean. And what is required for us to meet our 2030 goals is $9 on green. So that shows the magnitude of what needs to be done.
Did he also comment about the fact that developing countries like India have not been given any money despite big claims in the past?
We had it. Actually, it was amazing. And that brings me to the point on what is it that needs to be done by Global North? What is it that needs to be done by the multilateral organizations? I think Bretton Woods is history. I think we need to reform. We need to be innovative. We need the multilaterals to get engaged in the developing
And that's why the
economies.
International Solar Alliance is also important.
Absolutely. What we focus on is the fact that you need to lower the risks for developing countries. Guarantees by developed countries would help immensely.
Tejpreet, you spent a significant part of your professional life working for the biggest global corporation. You're now doing this on your own. Is technology and capital going to be made available for India's efforts to go green? I ask you from an umbrella point of view, not very specific corporate instances. What's your sense?
Yeah, so that I'm more optimistic on the technology side. I think given that a lot of people around the West, the East, it doesn't matter which part of the world, this is a revolution happening. And I think all of us as human society do feel that we need to help each other to make this revolution happen. I tell everybody this is not about the West versus the East. It's the environment. We all breathe the same air in other parts of the world. So therefore, it's a combined effort that we need to do it. On the capital side, the one point I would say is this. Capital goes to where it gets its returns, right? That's
and returns in India are subpar?
I wouldn't say subpar. It's challenging because
Due to regulatory?
I wouldn't say regulatory. It's capital markets. We have interest rates are relatively higher. Than
But why
the
would
West.
that be? I ask you from a general sort of industrial perspective. Foreign investors in many sectors have got oversized returns. Why would foreign capital in this space find it challenging?
Yeah. No, I think it's just the dynamics of an industry in a certain market is the fact that we are producing very, very low cost energy. And as a result of it, it forces all of us to rethink the entire supply
So
chain.
it's more like
to get,
telecom tariffs really.
Well, ultimately, it is the willingness and ability of people to pay for electricity. It's been a problem, and that's why you have a portion of the population which can afford to pay, and you also have a portion of the population which is challenged.
Why would populist chief ministers bother about whether the power was green, whether it was solar, or whether it was produced from other source if they have to announce subsidies?
Well, you remember the chief ministers have many challenges.
Okay.
Green is one of them. I mean, green constituencies occur everywhere, including in India.
Okay.
And the need to meet the populist challenges also occurs in those same states. They go between the two.
Okay. I'll wrap up this conversation with a quick point to all of you, and you can give your views. I'll start with you again, then Tejpreet, and finally Vaishali. The oil economy has been around largely for, let's say, 2 centuries, 150 years, really. The non-oil energy economy, on a time scale compared to oil economy, when will it mature equally and leave that behind?
Siddharth, it was towards just before the beginning of the Second World War, end of First World War and beginning of Second World War, that the US required by law that lighting by electricity be done, and it be done by oil, petroleum oil, not by whale oil. Whales were not becoming extinct at that time. We saw the growth of the industry because of a regulatory input. We are seeing the same thing happening now with renewables. It's happening much faster, and all of us expect that at least in the electricity sector, not in the energy as a whole, but in the electricity sector, even in India, we will see that more than 50% of the electricity is renewable by 2035.
2035, 50%. Bottom line. TP.
My view, Siddharth, is the fact that a country our size, we have to have a holistic approach to energy sources. We can't afford to do one or the other, etc. And I think the energy
And there's no
crisis,
single winner therefore.
That's right. The energy crisis in Europe has shown that if one of the biggest economies in Europe, with a green power minister, is starting nuclear power plants, that's where the world is going. So I think in our nation, we've done a phenomenal job with the push on natural gas. We're going to go from 6% to 15%. We plan to double from 64 BCM to 130 BCM of gas by 2030. We're laying a one nation, one gas grid. I think we have about 25,000 kilometers. In the next 3-4 years, we should be 35,000 kilometers. In terms of refineries, we're putting more refining capacity. So I think we're on the right path, that we're taking a holistic approach to energy sources that we have to do in our country. Yes, we have to go towards sustainability, but we also, I think, have to take a practical approach in the long term.
Vaishali, the final word today to you.
Yes, sure. No, I just want to look at the track record. If I look at the last decade, we, as I was saying, we generated about 160 gigawatts of clean energy. Over the next few years, 3 or 4 years, we're looking at generating the same amount. We had about $42 billion invested in this sector over the last decade. Year on year, over the next decade, we're going to have about $13 billion a year.
Annually. Wow.
Yeah, annually, right? So we're talking about huge shifts. And as I mentioned the statistic before, and I'll repeat it, that for every dollar on fossil free, we saw last year 1.5 being spent on green. So that data says a lot. So I would say that we are already on track.
We are on track, and I can tell you, viewers, that the sun was behind us, bright and shining when we started, but it's a bit moody here up in the skiing resort of Davos. The cold is again seeping in, the sun is hidden, but as far as India is concerned, green is the way to go. Tejpreet, Vaishali, Dr. Mathur, thank you very much for your time. With that, it's a wrap on this show. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.